Omish and Rashi, Parshas Re'eh, we continue with the second reading. Let's get right into it. We are in Devarim, chapter 11, verse 11. Or is it chapter 12? Chapter 12, sorry. Chapter 12, verse 11. Okay. V'haya, and it will be Hamalkam Asher Yivchar, the place that Hashem shall choose, Hashem Elokechem, Hashem your God, boy, Lashakin Shmo Yisham, to dwell his name there, Shama, there. So view, there you shall bring Kol Asher Anechi Mitzaveh Eschem, everything that I'm commanding you, they say, which it means, they seichem, means your ascent offerings, right? Those are offerings that are completely consumed on the altar, v'zivcheichem, and your peace offerings, masrei seichem, and your tithes, which are masyedchem, and the truma, the elevated of your hand, is literally what it means. First fruits that are elevated by hand, meaning, I think Rashi might explain, or maybe he did already, I think. Chol mivchar, nidrechem, and all of your choices, vows. In other words, your choices, you see here in the translation, how it just fills in the blanks. The bold in the translation is the words themselves, and then the commentary and the understanding, between the words, between the lines, so to speak, to fill in. So the choices of your vows, of the offerings, right? Asher tidru l'Hashem, that you will offer up to God. Okay, Rashi. Well, haya hamakom. So this is it's funny because it's like a continuation from yesterday. You should build for yourself a house of choice. That refers to Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem, right? In other words, it's God's choices of houses. Likewise, it says by King David, Yoshav HaMelech bebeisai, that happened when the king sat in his house, and Hashem gave rest from all around, meaning from all the enemies, he gave a rest. And the king, referring to King David, he said to Nathan the prophet, see now, I'm sitting in the house of cedars, and the ark of God sits within the curtain. Okay. Not exactly clear from how Rashi is. The thing there. I guess in the context of all the battles and everything, and you'll have then the time to the appropriate time to make the house of God's ultimate choice. Okay, Bishamas of you, and there you shall bring Lamaila Amar Linyan Shilai. Previously, it said with respect to Shilai. Remember, Shilai was where the Jewish people first, for 369 years, it's a long time, longer than America has been around, and so on, right? So for all of that time, they were bringing offerings to Shiloh. Now, this verse is talking not about Shiloh anymore, it's speaking about Jerusalem. So therefore here it's speaking in respect to Jerusalem. And this is why the Torah divides them. Litan heta ben zulazu. Oh, in other words, okay, Rashi's bothered, like, okay, just group them together. I mean, first was in Shiloh, and then there's the permanent house of God. So why is it not grouped together? Right? And we have a separation even in verses, let alone it could be maybe in the same verse. I don't know if that's what he means, right? So Shiloh, because when Shiloh was destroyed, they came to the tabernacle in Noiv, and then Noiv was destroyed. Uh, and they came to Gibeon. And that was between the two of them was 54 years. And then Bomas, which means platforms where you could make offerings, were permitted to bring voluntary offerings until they came to Jerusalem. And then when Jerusalem was built, right, once Jerusalem was built, then that's it. No more, no other place you can bring an offering, right? Not a voluntary offering, no type of offering. Little voluntary as meaning opposed to obligation. Obligation, obviously, it's God's obligation. You have to bring it in Jerusalem. Question is voluntary offerings. So the fact that there's a separation between Shiloh, the verses concerning Shiloh and bringing the offerings, which was yesterday um, um, in verse 5 and before that, um, and now in Jerusalem is to give a space for between, because there was a space of 54 years where they could bring a voluntary offerings and to give a nov and givai. That's what the verse is coming to say. The choices of your vow offerings, Melamed, this teaches that you have to bring from your choices offerings. In other words, when you're bringing an offering on the altar, it should not be, rather, something that's not a choice animal. Okay, v'samachtem, and you shall rejoice, lifnei Hashem, before God, Elokechem, your God, Atem, you, V'nechem, and your sons, V'neisechem, and your daughters, V'abdechem, and your male servants, V'aschem, and also your female servants, V'alevi, and likewise the Levi, the Levite, that is in your gate. Why do you have to rejoice with him? Because he doesn't have a portion, together with you, right? The Levites, which includes the Kohanim, by the way, includes the Kohanes, because the Kohen is from the tribe of Levi. So they don't get an inheritance. God is their inheritance, that they do the service in the Holy Temple. Hisham Aloch, be very careful. Take heed. Pentala, unless it comes up like that the ascent offerings will come to any site that you see fit, that you see. Okay, right? Again, so let's see Rashi. Hisham Aloch, beware for yourselves. Why is this telling us? This is similar to the class we had last night. Right? Till before this verse, we had a positive commandment that you had to come to Jerusalem and bring your offerings. Now what the Torah is doing is giving a negative commandment, right? Hishomer, be aware. This is giving a negative commandment, aladavar, concerning this matter. Any place that you see asher yala belivcha, in other words, will enter your heart. In others, you wish. Oh, you're at the Grand Canyon, and you're moved by the awesomeness of the Grand Canyon, and you want to bring an offering to God, right? A voluntary offering, right? You want to do that? You can't. Now there's a prohibition. But you may bring offerings outside of the holy temple, al pi navi, according to the prophet as Elijah did in Mount Carmel when he fought against the soothsayers of Baal, right? And the famous story there with Elijah the prophet. Interesting, because so Rashi is being exacting on the word that you will see. You, a regular person, right? You feel that it's fitting here to give an offering to God. I want to give a thanksgiving, or whatever. I was saved in the Grand Canyon. From the Grand Canyon, I was saved. So I want to bring an offering here, right? Or the Grand Canyon in Israel, Can't do it. You can't do it, but you know who could? In others, if it meant just you, any person, then it wouldn't say when you see. But there's someone who else is a real seer, and that's a prophet. When the prophet sees that there's a special occasion that you need to do it, guess what? The prophet can do it. You can't, but the prophet could. That's what right, and that's how Elijah the prophet knew that that on Mount Carmel, that the Mount Carmel is in Haifa, and he brought an offering there because he had to battle against the idolatry of Baal, and therefore there was a permission to do that based on this verse right here. Interesting, fascinating. Okay, yeah, we're good. Okay. But rather in the place of Shivcha Hashem, that Hashem will choose be'echad shebatecha in one of your tribes, right? One of your tribes. But this is from last night's class also, right? Sham taleh leisecha. You read some of these readings. There you will bring up your ascent offerings, complete burnt offerings. V'sham taseh kol asher anechem mitzavcha. And there you will do everything that you must do everything that I have commanded you. Rashi in 14. Among one of your tribes, this is the portion of Binyamin. Well, earlier it says, Mikol shiftecha, at a place of the Hashem your God will choose from all of your tribes. Mikol. So before it said from all of your tribes, and now it says in one of your tribes. So what is it? Is it from all of your tribes or one of your tribes? It's a different term, right? Okay, so how's this seemingly contradiction reconciled? David, when David bought the Geirin, he brought the threshing floor of the base of Migdash, Me'aravna Hayavusi, from Aravna, the Jebusite, Gava Hazah Mikol Shvatim. He collected the gold from all the tribes. Nonetheless, the threshing floor was a part of Benjamin. So, in other words, how's it from all the tribes? Because he took money from all the tribes, so that way the tribes all have an equal share in Temple Mount. But the fact is, it can't be property that belongs to all the tribes, right? Because each tribe got their own portion. It was a part that belonged to Benjamin. Number 15. However, all of you desire that you will slaughter, that your desire to slaughter, and you want to eat meat. In accordance to the blessing of God, Hashem, your God, Hashem also that He's given to you the blessing and all of the gates of your cities. So the richly impure and the richly pure may eat of it together, just as they eat the gazelle and the deer together. So what is this talking about? Actually, Rashi's asking the question. Let's see, Rashi. Right, what's going on over here in this verse? Among you, sorry. What's this verse talking about? So I didn't want to give away while I was reading it. If it's speaking about, literally means flesh of desire, meaning not holy meat, right? Not meat that's on the altar, but, dinner, right? Beef, a steak for dinner, or a polka for dinner, chicken for dinner, right? If it's speaking about that, to give them permission, that they can offer it without putting anything on the altar. This already we know from elsewhere. Yarcha b'Shem Elokecha es gvulcha, when Hashem will broaden your boundary, v'amarta el basar, and you're going to ask that you want to eat meat. Oh, we're going to have that in a few verses from now. This idea that you want to eat meat, so right. So this verse cannot be speaking about regular meat that you want to eat, on a Monday night barbecue. Sorry, yeah. So because that we learn out will be in a few verses. So what is this verse speaking about? Okay. This is being a holy offering, right? We're actually learning this in Rambam now. Psulim Mikdashim means the animals that are invalid, right? In other words, you have an animal that you set aside for an offering, and then it became invalid. It became, maybe something happened to it that it got a slit in the eye, right? Or something happened to it that is no longer what we call pure, top notch. Yeah, it's got a blemish that developed, right? So when so then you have to redeem it. Then it can be eaten in any place outside of the walls of Jerusalem. I might think that it may be redeemed even on a passing blemish, a blemish that will heal. Talmud Laimar, Rak, but that implies the text is not inclusive as it seems. Rashi indicates. Ha. Since it says but, so that means so excuse me, that means to minimize. So it's minimizing what is called a invalid offering. It's only something that a blemish that will be permanent. So what do you have to do? You have to then pay for that animal. That animal now becomes regular animal that you could slaughter it and eat it anywhere you want. It has no holiness to it because you've redeemed it with money. That money has holiness. What do you have to do with that money? You have to purchase another animal, right, that doesn't have a blemish, and then bring that as an offering. Wow. So the whole chapters that we're speaking about now, right now, this is what's based on Rambam. Fascinating how the two have come together today. To continue in Rashi, so you may slaughter it and eat it. So what does it say? So when we speak about it, right, we're speaking about, again, the context of a blemished offering. So I had to give the permission for animals, the fleece, the fleece of the animal or the mill, but you only have permission for nothing but eating. By means of slaughtering. I mean, eat it. Of course, of course. Um, so you can eat it, but you can't take its wool or milk. Because it says, because the verse says you can slaughter it and have the meat. Again, the implication is you can have its meat, but you can't have its fleece and you can't have its milk. Because that is when it's not slaughtered. So in other words, until you slaughter it, right, even though it's got a blemish, remember, it's got a blemish, the wool has a holiness to it, and the milk has a holiness to it. So the wool I guess would have to be given to the Kohen, I think. Actually, that's a good question. Maybe we're going to learn that at Rambam. I'm not certain what that means. Wow. Okay, folks, thank you all for being here because I am learning tremendous amount. I hope I'm teaching you a tremendous amount too. I hope so, because I'm definitely learning, like getting things each time we learn more and more. And yeah, Baruch Hashem. Okay, and likewise, that's wonderful. Okay, so then the verse says, "V'atame v'atahar," right? The impure one and the pure one. So what does that mean? Well, what does that mean in the verse? A kind of a funny term, right? Mm. Okay. Okay. So meaning the person who's pure or impure or pure, right? Since this is a blemished offering, right? So it has some force of sanctity in it. Shenemar behem, because it says, "V'abasa sheyiga b'tamei lo ye'echal," but the flesh that touches anything impure, you're not allowed to eat it, right? In other words, remember, this was set aside as an offering. It got a blemish, so it couldn't be offered. But yet there's some holiness. There's holiness there, so much so that the fleece and the milk, right, is has a holiness to it that you can't benefit from. Um, so as a result, therefore, therefore, the Torah had to permit regarding a blemished offering, Shetami V'Torah Yochlu, the both the impure person and the pure, obviously the pure person, that we would get. But the Torah wants to tell us that the impure person, like the pure person, they can participate in eating this. They can eat together, like a deer, like a heart, because there's an offering that comes from them. Right? You can't bring a deer as an offering, right? So the verse is coming to tell us just like the deer and the hart, you can't bring as an offering. The pure and the impure can eat together this slaughtered animal, right? After it was redeemed, of course, it was redeemed, right? And therefore it doesn't have holiness. Even the impure person can eat from it, right? So, why is it saying like the deer and the hart? The parchment is exempt them from there are certain parts of the animal. Uh, I was wondering why, it bothered me. And this is where Rashi comes to answer. You could just say the pure and the impure can eat it, right? Why do you have to say like the deer and the hart, right? Just they're not offerings, right? So Rashi comes and says this comes to exempt because you might think even though it's not an offering, but remember, an offering means it doesn't go on the altar. But maybe the parts that belong to the kohen, you have to give to him. After all, there's some holiness. There's some kind of holiness that was here. Maybe you have to give them their portion that's deserved to them. Why should they lose out just because it got a blemish? Remember, they don't have land. They don't have their own flock that they are going to be able to. So they got gifts that the Torah gives them in the stead of uh, for their service. So maybe they have to get their parts. So the Torah comes and says, just like the gazelle and the deer, meaning gazelle and the deer, the kohen doesn't get anything from it. So likewise here, they don't get anything from this offering that was a cow, because it wasn't a gazelle, right? It wasn't a deer. And Just like those, the Kohen gets nothing from it. So likewise here, they get nothing from it because it's a blemished animal. They will get, though, obvious, they will get their parts that come to them in the redeemed animal that's going with the money that was redeemed, and they bought another animal with it to bring as an offering. That they will get from, though. Okay, I hope I'm clear on all of this. And we ain't gonna finish this, so unfortunately. But fascinating. Okay. 15, 16 rather. Rak Hadam, however, but, or however, Hadam, the blood, don't eat it. Al artzish bechenu, kamayim. On the earth you shall spill it like water. Wow, right? Rashi. Rak Hadam lo chelu, but the blood you shouldn't eat. Falpi shamarti she'in lacha bo yizrikas dam abin. Even though, remember, this is a blemish sacrifice, right? So even though from the blood over here, you don't have to toss it on the altar, right? It doesn't apply, right? You usually what's done with the blood of the animal when it's an offering? It's the blood is taken and it's sprinkled on the altar. Okay, so now what? Now that it's a blemished animal and you slaughter it, you can't eat its blood, nonetheless, right? That's why we salt blood. We salt the animal to get the blood out, and soak it so the blood will come out of it, and so on. Right? That makes part of the koshering process. This is where we learn this idea that you have to kosher the animal. You have to get the blood out of the animal. Um, right. 6 minutes. The word rock. However, I mean, however. And others, you might think that blood only when it's a sacrificial offering on the altar. That's blood that you can't have from, right? And, that's got to go with the blood to God. But when it's no longer an animal that's going to be as an offering, and it's for you personally, maybe not. No, no. However, this too, you can't have the blood. It's tishbachena kamayim. What pour it like water? What does that mean? This is to teach a shein tzarich kisui that you don't need to cover. You don't need require. It's not required covering. Aha, because a fowl needs you need to cover the blood, and also a wild animal you need to cover the blood. A cow you don't have to, right? So that's what it means over here that you don't have to cover it, or like water. Right? Only for fowl you have to cover the blood. Those who have ever gone on Erev Yom Kippur to actually um, do kaparas and then have the animal slaughtered so that you get some sawdust and you make a bracha and you cover the blood. Because with a fowl, it's a mitzvah, and with a wild animal meaning like deer, right? That's kosher. You have to do it, but a cow not, sheep not. Alternative explanation why it says too that you should throw the blood like water, Chareh hukamayim, because it's like water. The hakshir azraim, to ready the seeds, to render foods such as seeds susceptible to receiving impurity. Ah, that this blood can become impure because it's like water can become impure, like the seeds that come. Ah. So it's coming to teach us a whole different point, a whole different idea. Alternative explanation is that blood is like water, right? Coming to tell me, just like water prepares something, like if you have a fruit and you wash it, right? That fruit now can become impure, right? Can become impure. If there's seven liquids and one of them is blood, how do I know? Because that's what this verse is coming to teach me by saying like water. Interesting. Okay. 17. Okay, this is what we learned last night. Okay, this is the verse from last night that we did the Rashi. So let's first do the pasuk. Lo yisuchal. You're not able. Lo yisuchal. Here it translates, you may not. Lechol, to eat. You're not allowed to eat. You may not consume. Lo yisuchal. You're not able. Proper translation. Again, we always learn in context over here, and we'll see, right? That's how it's translated. But I want to help you with the Hebrew. You're not able to eat, to consume, bisharecha, in your cities, within your cities, in the gates of your cities. Meiser, tithes, speaking about second tithes, the gancha, grain, tzirecha, wine, tzirecha, oil, olive oil, the and likewise the firstborn, the karcha of cattle, the tzayinecha, and of sheep, and all of your vows, that you will make a vow, v'nidvos, um, that's probably more like oaths, and then nidvos, oh no, nidvosech, and all of your dedications, b'trumas yedchem, and the first fruits of your elevated by your hand. Rashi. So loy suchal, you may not. Vol kosuv litin loy sase, comes the verse here to give a negative commandment. All the davar concerning this, right? Others not just it's a positive commandment, but that you have to eat the second tithes in Jerusalem. That's a positive commandment, right? Remember yesterday we said, well, what happens if you can't? You still have the positive commandment to eat tithes, right? To have your second time. So maybe if it's impossible, you can have it. No, now comes leisuchal. You're not able to. Leisuchal literally means that you're not able. He said, "Yo, chalata, you're able. But you're not permitted." What do we explain? You're able. Another, you're able maybe because you have a positive commandment to eat the second tithes. And maybe if you're outside of Jerusalem and you're not able to get to Jerusalem, maybe you have to, second best, eat it wherever you are. I mean, you have a commandment to go to Jerusalem, so you might see them two separate commandments. No, you're not permitted. In other words, they really come together as one, and therefore you're not permitted. So we have similar to this as Yavusi Yeshve Yishalayim, the Jebusite that was inhabitants of Jerusalem, Lo Yochel B'nei Yehuda, Harisham, and the children of Judah were not able to drive them out. They were able to. How come they were able to? Says the Rebbe explained, because they have a commandment from God to drive out all of the inhabitants in the land of Canaan. But they were not permitted. Why were not permitted? Because Avram entered in a covenant with them. When he took the cave of the Machpelah, when he bought it for a burial place for his wife Sarah, and they were not the Jebusites then, they were the Hittites. Ella. So the verse refers to the Jebusites, right? Al Shem Because the name of the city was Yavuz, so it's explained, and this is what it says, unless you remove the blind ones from the lame ones, Slamim, the blind ones and the lame ones, and verse means to say Shekosva Aleim, it's a shvua because the oath is about them. In other words, even though we were two different nations, right? Two different time periods, two different nations, but they are of the same. And therefore, in the city of Yivus, right, which is uh, Jerusalem, it wrote there the oath that Abraham made. On the first one of your cattle, as ordered the Kohanim, there's a negative commandment that applies to the Kohanim, which was Yetchem, in the raise of your hand, Ela Bikurim, this is the first fruits. Okay, I would love to continue, but we're gonna go to Tanya.